Hello, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for stopping by. My name is Ruby, this is Ruby Red, and today I'm going to talk to you about all the books that I read in July while I show you what went on in my reading journal this month. This has been a really fun video to be putting together every month. If you don't know, I made this little notebook earlier this year, and every book that I've read for the last couple of months has gotten a 2-page spread where I do a little art piece that is inspired by the book. And then I put it all together in this video. I read a lot of books in July, so this was kind of overwhelming to make this month, but it's also been such a rewarding process and project. It's definitely the most consistent that I have been with like creating some kind of art, just like so regularly, and for so long. Like the most consistent I've been since like probably high school or something. Like I just haven't drawn this much in ages. So that's been fantastic. And before we get started, I just want to also say a quick thank you to the artist Katie Mai, whose channel and website are linked below, because I saw her doing her reading wrap-ups in this format on Instagram, and I was super inspired by just like the whole idea, and that is what led us here today. And I'm so grateful. So thanks, Katie. Hers are amazing, so definitely check those out. But without any more chit chat, let me show you the journal and talk about the books. The first book I finished in July was Thunderhead by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. I think I talked a lot about this in my currently reading vlog, but I think that I was calling it by Lincoln and Child. Anyway, this book tells the story of an expedition led by our main character, Nora Kelly, to find a lost Native American city. It's a really dangerous and challenging trip, and it is based on the smallest shred of evidence, by the way. So with an ensemble cast of various different experts with the various personality quirks, it was fun trying to keep up with the interpersonal drama, but overall, the story left a kind of weird taste in my mouth. Nora and her group face challenges in traveling so deep into this dangerous canyon territory to find the lost city, as well as some very alarming bits of sabotage that start like really before the expedition even gets off the ground. The group is trying to find a lost Anasazi city, and the city itself is fictional, but the people were real. And I would just like to add here that the name Anasazi developed from the Navajo word for enemy ancestors, and today the preferred name is just ancestral Puebloans. Now, the most interesting thing to me about this book was the way that various forms of magic used by these ancestral and modern Puebloans, which are things we generally consider to be myths, are explained with modern science. And I think it's interesting to remember how things that we can explain now were thought of as magic in the past. And so there must be things that exist in present day that are not yet explainable by science, but are still real. Anyway, there are parts of the story that had me actually afraid. I could not read it at night, and I love that, but the way that some of the relationships developed and the way some characters were written was either offensive or very confusing, and certainly a product of the book being written in the 90s by these two dudes with two female main characters. But the actual biggest issue, aside from the horrendous treatment of horses, by the way, big trigger warning, was that I sometimes couldn't tell if a person was acting cagey and suspicious or if they were just badly characterized. So I didn't know who to trust, and I ended up misjudging a lot of characters by accident. And for this journal spread, I just went ahead and looked up some photos of the pottery by the ancestral Puebloans, and they did have a lot of really beautiful pottery, and the patterns were so intricate, so I just drew some pots. I love pottery. I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read was Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, translated by Antonia Lloyd-Jones. This is a Nobel Prize winning work of translated fiction. It was translated from Polish, and I'm so glad I finally read it. It follows an older woman who's a caretaker of summer homes in the Polish mountains, and she's not very fond of people. She has very strong views on what kind of rights and permissions exist to life, and also some on usefulness. So she's constantly at odds with the locals, who are avid hunters, and people just think she's a crazy old woman. And the main story of this book is a mystery. There are a series of deaths in this town, and they seem to be murders committed by animals who were being hunted by those humans who are now dead. So throughout this ongoing investigation, our main character is lobbying for hunting to stop, to bring peace back to the countryside and make all of the murders stop, and to stop what she sees as senseless violence and the murder of animals. Another element of the story is that our main character is very into astrology, and so there are lots of discussion of astrological aspects and cause and effect, and that brings this whole free will versus destiny element into the book, especially as it relates to the free will of man to hunt animals for food and of animals to potentially retaliate. Or was it just fate for these people to be killed, etc. There's also discussion of use and how people see her as a useless woman with useless hobbies and animals as useful only in what they can provide with their death. Resource consumption, who's deserving of what, all of that is wrapped up in this story, and I absolutely loved it. For my journal, I tried my hand at painting a snowy landscape in some blues, and then I just wrote in this quote about what has use that I really couldn't stop thinking about. And I will read it for you now. But why should we have to be useful, and for what reasons? Who divided the world into useless and useful, and by what right? Does a thistle have no right to life, or a mouse? Whose intellect can have had the audacity to judge who is better and who worse? A large tree, crooked and full of holes, survives for centuries without being cut down because nothing could possibly be made out of it. Everyone knows the profit to be reaped from the useful, but nobody knows the benefit to be gained from the useless. I gave this book 4 stars. The next book I read was A Manual for Cleaning Women by Lucia Berlin. This is a collection of short stories written by Lucia Berlin. I don't know how autobiographical they are. I suspect that she used these various stories to explore different trauma and relationships throughout her own life, but from different perspectives. So in a way, I think they may all be semi-autobiographical. The stories deal with alcoholism, with addiction, and relationships, good and bad, relationships between mother and child, and family and friend, as well as romantic relationships. The only thread I can now recall as connecting them is trauma and also human perseverance, I suppose. It was a haunting and beautiful collection, and I think if I had read it instead of listening to the audiobook, I might be able to talk about what made me love it more, but alas, it is what it is. I chose for my journal spread to draw a laundromat because a few of the stories take place in or surrounding a laundromat, and the sign in that laundromat announcing "you can die here anytime." I just had that visual stuck in my head while I was listening to most of this book. And then I read another quote in one of the machines. I said an Ave Maria, but there was so much noise everywhere. How could a prayer ever be heard? Because that's sort of how this whole book felt, and I really loved it. It hurt, it was beautiful, it made me feel a lot of things, and I'm very glad I read it. 4 stars. Then I read The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This book, oh boy. If I loved it less, I might be able to talk about it more. If you know, you know. I adored this book, and while I do think it's more fun for it to be read after the author's 2 previous works, The Glass Hotel and Station 11, I think you could fully enjoy it without having read them. This is a time travel science fiction novel. It has a couple of main characters in different time periods. One is Edwin in the 1900s, who's moved to Canada from England and is trying to find himself or something. Another one is Olive, who's an author from the moon colonies in like 2100, I think, who is touring her pandemic book on Earth. And the final perspective is Gaspery, who was named for a character in Olive's book. And he's hired a couple hundred years in her future to be a sort of investigator in this weird little thing that happened. This was such a stellar time travel book. The characters are engaging on their own, and the way the narratives weave together was just perfect. It was a moving and beautiful story about the loss and fear that come with a pandemic, which we're all way too familiar with at this point, but also how those things can linger and time moves in all directions and history repeats itself. It was a truly wonderful book, and this was a journal spread. I knew what it was going to be so fully as I was reading the book, which is refreshing because for most of these other books, I was so stumped. I drew an oak leaf in my best attempt at realism. There's an oak tree that's sort of central to the plot of this, and I love oak trees, and this was a real challenge, and it was out of my comfort zone for sure, but I'm so happy with it. And the quote I noted here is, "If there's pleasure in action, there's peace in stillness." And I gave this book 5 stars. Then I read Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This is a sci-fi mystery with some romance and political intrigue thrown in. We are following Kiem and Janan, who are thrown together in a political alliance/marriage, and they have to figure out how to make that work while also holding up their new partnership to the scrutiny of an emissary from a ruling body in their galaxy. So the mystery of the story surrounds the death of Janen's previous partner, which was also a political match, who died very recently in basically a car crash, but in space. And he has had to immediately remarry, which makes the whole thing feel just a lot more complicated. As these two men are fumbling through their relationship and the expectations of that intergalactic emissary, they find out that there might be more to that crash than Janen and everyone else was led to believe. And so the two of them are trying to play nice for the press and the Emperor, but they're also trying to get to the bottom of this. I loved reading these two characters on their own and especially together. I found this tale to be overall so heartwarming and I had a great time reading. The orbit of the title, in my opinion, refers to our two boys orbiting each other because their true selves seem to remain just out of reach of the other's understanding for so much of this book. There's a lot of miscommunication in this, but it didn't drive me up the wall like it usually does because it felt so true to life and how these two people would interact. They're strangers to each other. How could they possibly know how to talk to each other? The situation is just so weird. I felt like the writing of their relationship was super honest, and that made it that much more upsetting and heartwarming. And I was really stumped about what to put in my journal for this book because I didn't want to draw some kind of space tech. So I ended up just making a little starry sky, and I used the colors of the bi flag for my stars and the title because I thought that those were the colors on the cover of the book, and I thought it was intentional, like this is a bisexual book. But actually it's the pan flag that is the colors of the book's cover, so I should have done yellow instead of purple. My bad. I gave this book 4 stars. Then I read Death in the Clouds by Agatha Christie. This is another installment in the Hercule Poirot mystery series, and I read it in my Squash That Series vlog. We follow our favorite mustachioed detective as he ponders his way through a crime with seemingly no solution. The story takes place on an airplane, and when the airplane is boarding, everyone is alive, but when it's getting time to land, it's discovered that one of the passengers has been killed. And of course, Poirot was on the plane, but he slept through most of the flight, so he doesn't have any of his own observations to solve the crime, and he has to just puzzle it out from other characters' perspectives. So the puzzle is very typical of Miss Christie, where we have not only to figure out who would want to kill this woman, but also how somebody could have committed this crime in a small space in a short amount of time. There were a dozen characters' perspectives with each of their internal monologues, and also what seemed like a dozen motives and a whole bunch of red herring plot lines that I absolutely was tricked by. Overall, though, this did not go so well for me. I enjoyed the mystery, but the characters were behaving badly once again. It's a product of the times. Specifically, some of the sexism that the male characters in this displayed was just a step too far for me. The issue really is that I can excuse or tolerate reading books with that kind of content or with characters who have those kinds of sentiments if I feel like there's some other benefit to be gained by consuming that work. But in this case, I cannot see another benefit. It's just a goofy little mystery I didn't need to consume at all. So for that reason, this is the last installment of the Hercule Poirot mysteries that I'll be attempting to read, at least in order. I might still read a few of the later ones that are adapted into movies so that I can watch the movies, but this series is kind of done for me. The journal concept was just based on a doodle I had been doing that week in my planner, these little flowers in a grid, and I tried to make it like a pixelated sky with the clouds, and there was a wasp involved in the plot, so thank God I had some bee stickers on hand. This was very low effort, but I gave the book 2 stars. Next, I read Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the final book in the Foundry Side trilogy. It's also in the Squash That Series vlog, so I can't talk that much about the plot without spoiling the other 2 books, but it's a fantasy world with a fun logic-based magic system, kind of like Coding Reality, and we've got ourselves a little ensemble cast working together to commit some crimes. Lesbian main character, there is this key that in my head speaks with a heavy Jersey accent. The magic system is so complicated and delicate that it gets messed up all the time. Everyone is just crossing their fingers, so all that makes for some very fun times. This book being the finale, the overall conflict and climax were so enormous and intense and frankly overwhelming, which I didn't love, but the ending absolutely broke my heart. Oh my God, it hurt so much. There was also some stuff about hive mind that I was not seeing eye to eye on with the author, but something that I did take away from this was the landscapes in this world. Sanchia and her crew travel across quite a few different terrains throughout this book, and I found a lot of those descriptions to be beautiful and kind of inspiring. And I also got this catalog from Viking cruise ships, so I used that for my journal. Overall, I think that this book specifically tried to do a bit too much, but I do think the series was really imaginative, really fun, had some characters that I would lay down my life for. So what more could you ask for, I suppose? And that floating black square is a plot device that I can't explain, but I had to include. I gave this 3 stars. Then I read A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This was the second book in the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. I absolutely live and die for The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and this book is more of a spin-off than a sequel to that. It follows two characters that you meet very briefly in the first book, but it goes into so much more depth about who they are and how they came to be who they are, and who they're going to be in the future. I know that sounds like a lot, but this book really was a lot. Without any spoilers for the first book, I will tell you that this follows two main characters, one of whom is the owner of a shop dealing in tech repair and replacement parts, and the other character is an AI system that's been installed in a body kit. So she's a computer program that is running in this human-looking body, and that practice of putting an AI into a body kit is illegal in this part of space, so she has to pretend to be an actual human. The beauty of this story comes from the way that both of these characters were born/created as tools for a specific use, and then they gained their freedom in some way and had to learn not only how to inhabit a wider world than they ever thought that they would, but also to answer the very brutal question, how do you find out who you are, and how do you hold on to that in a world that thinks of you as an abomination? Truly heartwarming, so nice. I love this author. So for my art piece here, I didn't want to do the same thing as I did for the other sci-fi this month, so I gave myself a space background and I cut out some planets from different images and paper I had lying around, and I'm really pleased with the results. Actually, I'm on such a collage kick right now. I gave this book 4 stars. Then I read Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, translated by Elizabeth Jacquet. This is a novella told in 2 parts. The first part is following a group of Israeli soldiers and their commander who are tasked with holding the Egyptian border and eradicating any Arabs that they see. And there's this thing with a scorpion, like the desert itself wants to exterminate these invaders. Anyway, they come across an unarmed family traveling through the desert, and they execute them all except for one woman who they bring back to their camp, and they rape, kill her, and leave her buried in the sand. And the second part of the novella follows the journey of a Palestinian woman who reads an article about that incident and becomes obsessed with it, and takes a very treacherous journey through the occupied territories to try to find out more about what happened to this woman. And the title refers to a minor detail that has triggered her obsession, which is the date of the incident being the same date as her birth. But the way that it was written, with so much attention paid to so many minor details, that the story becomes that much more visceral and painful. And the last sentence frankly shattered me. Fantastic. And for my journal, I painted some very simple sand dunes. I've seen graphics like this on Pinterest many times before, and I thought it captured the bleakness of the story, and obviously it takes place in a desert. I gave this 4 stars. And the final book I read in July was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, translated by Gregory Rabassa. This book tells the story of the Buendia family in a fictional village in Colombia. It chronicles the life and death of several generations of this one family, and it explores a variety of different solitudes, both physical and emotional. This family, and to an extent the whole town of Macondo, live this isolated, solitary life, and throughout the book we follow one generation after another, going through the same issues, the same heartbreaks and ailments, and of course the same names. The family tree in the front was essential, but even then, they do just all have the same names. There's so much about isolation in this book, and doubling back and doubling down, and everything comes back again. This is known as one of the quintessential examples of magical realism. There are many unexplainable things and just general magic happenings. It was a really engaging read that has left me with too many things still rolling around in my brain. And when I read the last page, I wanted to flip back to the first one and start it over again. For my journal, I picked an image that really stuck with me while I was reading, this swarm of yellow butterflies that show up every now and then, and I drew 100 of them. I wanted to make absolutely sure I drew 100, and I did. And I gave this 4 stars, but because of the way that I can't stop thinking about it, I feel like I probably should have given it 5. And that brings us to the end of this wrap up. I do think that I had some very fun, challenging pieces in this month's artwork, but I think next month I want to try to just do some more straight up drawing and some more detail work. I think a lot of these seemed kind of slapped together, which some of them definitely were. I'm not always feeling super inspired, and I'm also not always feeling super inspired at the same times when I have space to set up my desk and my camera and everything to do the artwork. So there's definitely a possibility of some pieces next month not being like a process video. I'm gonna sort of see how I decide to make that all work. But yeah, I definitely want to be doing some more like intricate and not done sitting at my desk drawing, because that's not always where I'm feeling the vibe. So you're gonna have to come back next month and see how that went down. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate all the comments on these videos. Your support has been amazing. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because that really means a lot to me as well. And I hope to see you back here sometime soon for another video. Goodbye.